In the 1940s, the on-again, off-again Prime Minister Nuri as-Said and Abdullah, the uncle of Iraq's king, who served as the king's regent until he came of age, instituted a denazification of the Iraqi government. Colonel Salah ad-Din as-Sabah, Kamil Shabib, Fahmi Saeed, and Mahmoud Salman, leading members of Rashid Gailani's deposed National Defense Government, were put to death. Gailani survived, fleeing to Saudi Arabia, where the king, Ibn Saud, protected him. With Gailani out of the picture, Iraq reverted to an awkward mix of monarchical and democratic governance. Sunni Arabs dominated the national government, ignoring the interests and violating the rights of minority groups, though they lacked the genocidal zeal of Sidki and Gailani. Still, little progress was made in resolving the basic concerns of Kurds in northern Iraq over the distant, unrepresentative government in Baghdad. In 1943, Mustafa Barzani led the Kurds in revolt against the national Iraqi government again. He demanded almost total autonomy for Iraqi Kurdistan. Mustafa was neither a Nazi nor a communist. He was a Kurdish nationalist, and at the time, he believed Britain was too distracted with defeating the Nazis and their allies in World War II to bother intervening in Iraq yet again. At this point, the British had intervened in 1918, 1920, and again in 1941. This time, the Iraqi government was on its own. In April of 1945, Prime Minister Nuri as-Said tried to appease Barzani by pardoning him, but he refused to grant the Kurds self-rule. Unappeased, the Kurds would not put down their weapons. Iraqi forces chased the rebels back across the border into Iran, which officially stopped calling itself Persia in 1935, but for all intents and purposes was essentially the same country. Mahmoud Barzani had found refuge in the mountainous, largely Kurdish border region when he escaped the Iraqi government a few years earlier. In the 30s, the Iranian Kurds had revolted under Simko Shikak, Jafar Sultan, Hama Rashid, and in 1945, Qazi Muhammad. Nuri as-Said inadvertently pushed his own Kurdish insurgency out of Iraq and into Iran, just as Qazi prepared to go to war. The end of World War II brought the Cold War. Russia, which now called itself the Soviet Union, backed ethnic Azeri separatists in northwestern Iran, part of a larger campaign to expand the Soviet Union into the Middle East. The Soviets were thoroughly surprised when Qazi Muhammad and Mustafa Barzani approached them requesting assistance. The Kurds weren't communists, but they also weren't capitalists, they weren't caliphate revivalists, and they hated the Iranian Empire. Seeing a confluence of interests, the Soviets ordered the Azeris to assist the Kurds. On January 22, 1946, Qazi Muhammad declared the Komari Mahabad, the Republic of Mahabad, on the Iraqi-Iranian border. Mustafa became Qazi's defense minister and promptly took to fighting the Iranian military. Mahabad, an odd coalition of Iraqi Kurdish nationalists, Iranian Kurdish nationalists, and Azeri communists, lasted less than a year. The US pressured the Soviet Union into withdrawing its troops from Iranian territory. In December, Iran invaded Mahabad, re-established their sovereignty, and hanged Qazi Muhammad, destroying the Kurdish Republic. Mustafa led the Mahabad army across the border into the Soviet Union in retreat. Iraq was finally free of its Kurdish problem, thanks in absolutely no part to the Iraqi government, which did not contribute to the war effort. Just as one enemy was vanquished, new threats emerged. Revolutionaries led by Yusuf Salman Yusuf, aka Comrade Fahd, created the Iraqi Communist Party in 1934. The government relentlessly harassed them for more than a decade, but the monarchy was more concerned about the threat from right-wing extremists. Bakr Sidki and Rashid Gailani did not exist in a vacuum. They came out of a coherent faction of nationalists who sympathized with the anti-Semitic racial supremacism of Nazi Germany and fascist ideology. This faction coalesced into the Independence Party in 1945. In neighboring Syria, National Socialists led by Michel Aflaq, a Christian, created the Ba'ath Party, which seized power there in 1954, and actively conspired to seize power in Iraq. In January 1948, the British sought a new Anglo-Iraqi treaty, recognizing Iraq's new significance as an emerging oil power in the Cold War Middle East. Communists and fascists put aside their differences and banded together, just as the Shia and Sunni parties had in 1920. They launched national protests, the Al-Wathba uprising, to dissuade the king from signing a treaty. Once again, the government violently put down the agitators. Abdullah, acting as a regent for Faisal II, sacrificed a weak prime minister in favor of Muhammad Sadr, who had retained credibility for the role he had played in the 1920 revolt. Iraq preserved its special relationship with Britain, but in June, the United Nations petitioned Britain's mandate in Palestine. The Arab states coordinated an invasion of Israel with British assistance, but within a few months they were defeated. Iraq, backed by the British Empire, had lost a war against a tiny foe that a few months before had not even had a national army, much less a state. The loss shocked the national consciousness of the humiliated Iraqis. A small community of Palestinians, displaced and expelled during the war, relocated to refugee camps in Baghdad, where they mainly continue to live today. Iraq's neighbors took in even larger communities of Palestinians. But Iraq had a special relationship with Palestine that transcended the war with Israel. When Gilani took office in 1941, one of his closest advisors was Muhammad Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, a pro-Nazi religious leader in the region's holiest city. The Mufti escaped Iraq in 1941, going first to Iran and then to Nazi Germany. But before he left, Iraqi Nazis, incited by the Mufti's call to jihad, unleashed the Farhud, a day of anti-Jewish rioting, in which thousands were attacked and hundreds were killed. When Israel declared its independence, the Iraqi government expelled its Jewish population. A massive 118,000 Iraqi Jews resettled in Israel. Iraq's neighbors were just as appalled with their governments for their collective defeat. In 1952, army officers in Egypt overthrew their king and turned their country into a republic. The officers in Egypt demonstrated that the monarchies of the Arab world were not invulnerable. They could be destroyed. Following their example, a month later, fascists and communists in Iraq staged another round of national protests, the Iraqi Intifada, to try to overthrow Iraq's monarchy. Abdullah sacrificed another weak prime minister and placed an army general at the head of his government. In 1953, Faisal became a man and effectively succeeded his uncle as king. Al-Wathba and the Intifada failed, but Iraq ended up with new leaders anyway. The British didn't like what they'd seen. They wanted assurance that Iraq would stay firmly in their defensive sphere. So in 1955, 5 nations, Iraq, Iran, Pakistan, Turkey, and the UK, formed the Baghdad Pact, later known as CENTO, the Central Treaty Organization, a mutual anti-communist alliance that functioned like a NATO for the Middle East. In February 1958, Syria and the newly Republican Egypt merged together as a united Arab republic. The Hashemites, wary of their new neighbors' pan-Arabist aspirations, simultaneously united Transjordan and Iraq as the Arab Federation. Neither union lasted long. In July, the Homeland Officers Association, led by Abdul Salam Arif and Abdul Qassim, overthrew Faisal. 38 years of Hashemite rule in Iraq ended as it became a republic. Qassim had the entire royal family and Prime Minister Nuri as-Said assassinated. Arif advocated merging the UAR and the Arab Federation, creating a pan-Arab state from the Nile to the Tigris, a country with more than 40 million people, almost twice the size of Iran, the next largest republic in the Middle East. But Nasser's dream never had a chance. Transjordan, a Hashemite monarchy, had no interest in working with the men who had just murdered their king's cousin. Iraq reverted to an independent state, and CENTO moved to Turkey. In addition to the UK, Transjordan, and the UAR, Qassim alienated the United States by allying with the Soviet Union, drawing upon the Iraqi Communist Party for support, and asserting Iraq's sovereignty over Kuwait and Iranian Khuzestan, the southwestern, largely Arab portion of Iran. Relations with the Kurds were initially very good, but they soon deteriorated as well. Qassim and Arif destroyed the monarchy, an institution that had endured almost 4 decades of revolutionary activity and ethnic separatism. But like Gilani and Sidki before him, their rule did not last long, as another faction of totalitarian plotters seized the moment and control of Iraq: the Baathists.